What it do, y'all, and welcome back to my channel. So for today's video, I'm so excited to be coming here talking about 5 of the latest eyeshadow palettes that I got my opinions and thoughts on. It's been a while since I've done a palette roundup, and soon I will be filming another kind of roundup of non-paletted items because I have some that I'm like almost done testing, so I want to kind of wait and get just a couple more items for you guys. But it takes a lot longer for me to do these videos, mainly because I'm just not buying as much eyeshadow, let alone makeup this year. And so when I really take the time to get to know these palettes, I feel like it's even more helpful for you guys. Even if something looks cute or it really worked nicely the first time, how is it long term? How am I enjoying it in my collection? How is the usage and all of that jazz? So hopefully this video is very helpful for you guys. And with that said, let's just dive on in. Alrighty, so if you've never seen this type of video from me, typically what I like to do is talk about each palette, and then I will do a ranking towards the end. And about midway through the year and at the very end of the year, I usually do a ranking of all of the palettes that I've talked about to those distinct points in time. So if you are interested in these type of videos and you like them, just stay tuned. They do happen somewhat consistently. They used to, at least. This year, maybe not so much, but either way, you will be seeing more content like this from me. So stick around if you are interested and hit that subscribe button. Now, let's just dive on in because, like I said, we only have 5 palettes, so let's try not to make this a 30-minute video. This is the Shroud Cosmetics Moonfall palette. I have done, I think, a couple of videos on this palette already on my channel. I know I did a membership tutorial with this, and this is quite a deep, dark palette. I knew that picking it up, so don't think that I am surprised by any means. And I've already tried this brand's formula time and time again. So there was no surprises at all when it came to that, and I'm very appreciative of that. These mattes are really nicely pigmented and easily blendable. If you're not into a very overly pigmented matte, I would not recommend this formula because this is very, very pigmented in my opinion. So if you aren't, definitely have a big fluffy brush that is clean and start with a smaller brush and really start to build from there. Tap off your brush additionally as well. As for the shimmers, they're really, really nice shimmers. Sparkly, foiled. They're not necessarily textured, but they do have dimension with the sparkles in the kind of more traditional metallic looking shimmers. So I really do love this palette overall. It is, like I said, very, very dark though. So if you are of a lighter skin tone, you may have to bring in some other shades if you need something to transition, or you, like I said, you're really just going to need to use a big fluffy brush to really blend the shade that you use in your crease to your skin tone. For me, it's not as drastic of a change, and I can honestly use this primordial shade and the moon moss. Those are really good crease shades for me with my skin tone. So yeah, there is that palette. Then we have the Glamlight Friday the 13th palette, and this is one that I got on sale, so I do think that that kind of plays into kind of my opinions on this particular palette. Once again, overall very, very dark. You really don't have a lot of light tones or shades, which I think makes perfect sense for the theming and for the time of year that this originally came out for. I just wanted to make that known. I do believe Moonfall came out closer to winter than fall as well, so keep that in mind. As for the mattes here, I think they're fine. They're a little bit thinner than some of their mattes. I find that Glamlight doesn't necessarily have a very consistent formula. Some palettes are one way, some palettes are another. I find that this is a little bit of a thinner matte than what I'm used to. I'm specifically thinking about their like Scooby-Doo bigger palette. That is one of my favorite palettes from the brand, and they have just a thicker matte formula there. They also have brighter and lighter shades in that formula, so that also might be playing a part into like my preferred preference there. Anyways, as for the shimmers, I find that these are weaker once again in my opinion. They're a little bit too dispersed of a sparkle. And the way that I like to apply my shades, I use them with my finger, and I find that once I put them on my finger, they just kind of go on as a very smooth metallic. It's not like a dimensional metallic with shimmer, or like, it's just, there's no real texture. Even if it's not a physical texture, it doesn't even seem like a visual texture either. And so I think that's my big hang up on this. The two reds, honestly, I don't see a difference. This is more or less a matte with shimmer, then you have an actual matte. So I mean, is it a huge difference? Maybe not, at least not for me. As for these two shades here, I thought they were actual browns. They're more of purples, at least when I apply them, they pull more as purples on my eyes. So overall, I think there are definitely cons and positives to this palette. You just kind of have to know it going in. And this also appears very stark to me compared to all of the mattes. And I just find that you need something either transitionally, or you really have to blend to get any of these mattes to go to this really, really bright shimmer. I just don't prefer that huge stark difference. Coming in on the third palette, we have the Juvia's Place Bronze Rustic palette. I picked this up because I was doing a full face of Juvia's Place, and I like this palette. I really do. This was one of the palettes that I thought actually had a decent color scheme, which is why I picked it up. There's not a whole lot of depth. I thought that this particular shade was really going to bring depth to the palette. Not so much. This is pretty much like if I was still doing cutting my brow under and setting it so I had like a highlighted brow bone, this would be that. So I hope that helps kind of compare for that. This is also a very thin kind of mustardy orange situation, so I really have to pack it on. Primarily when I reached for this palette, it was these two shades and this shimmer. That was it. So for me, I mean, yeah, I like the color scheme. Yeah, I can find an eyeshadow look, but in the grand scheme of things, am I finding multiple looks, which is a criteria for something that really stays in my collection? Unfortunately not. Then we have the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. Once again, background for kind of my love or hate, if you will, on this palette is the fact that I only paid what, maybe $5-10, something like that. I used a Beautylish gift card and I only had to pay whatever the palette cost is minus $60. And this is a really nice palette. I like the variety and textures on the shimmers. I love the depth in these mattes, and this is truly a deep matte. I think this is one of the deepest shades that Natasha has done in this style of packaging and this size packaging. So I'm really enjoying this palette. If you're interested in a comparison between this and the Makeup by Mario, for me, this palette definitely goes deeper and it has more texture variety in those shimmers. You really just don't get that variety in the Makeup by Mario palette, although I do enjoy that palette and I have reached for it since reviewing it. This palette just gives more texture variety and it has more nuance in the undertones. You can do more neutral, nude, slightly warm undertone look, and then slightly cooler looks. I haven't really reached for those cool tones just because that's just not a preferred color scheme for me. Yes, this is supposed to be a very neutral palette, but there is still a slightly leaning warm and cool kind of under hue of all of these tones, and so I've really reached for the more warm ones. I do like the shade Stone as well, and yeah, I like this palette. This is one of my preferred palettes that I've picked up, I want to say, this year. And then the last palette that I picked up is the Ace Bute, which one is this? Their Ambience palette. Now this is a brand that I have not had the best impressions of their formula throughout the years. I have tried their formulas previously and I haven't been a huge fan, but something just had me really try this brand. And I think it's just certain colors in this palette are just kind of my it colors. I love these like autumnal colors, this like interesting green, and then these four. These just have some of those autumnal colors that I just reach for. That said, I will say this, I really like the matte formula in this palette. I find that this is a better, drastically better formula, at least in my opinion, than their previous ones. It is a thicker formula. It is more pigmented. So I find that once you place it on your eye, you really get some oomph there. I don't feel like it's very thin and that you can actually see my primer under. So I truly appreciate that. As for the shimmers, I think they're very, very smooth, which I appreciate, but they lean a lot more towards metallics than something that has a little bit more texture. I would love to see this brand, if they don't already, I would love to see them have a shimmer formula like this, but just have at least one or two with a little bit more texture in there. Whether it's a shimmer in there, whether it's a little bit of a duochrome, whatever. I would just love to see that because I didn't really feel like any of these really provided that, at least not to me. And like I said, this is the first palette that I've picked up since, like, I think this is now their third formulation. So I don't know if they have kind of these requirements that I'm asking for in some of these other formulas. Overall, I think this is a very solid palette, and it's definitely making me think that I need to kind of look in their catalog to see if there's another palette that I would be interested in picking up maybe in the future that would add some value to my collection, because I genuinely think that this is a really good palette. Once again, I did get this on sale, so definitely keep that in mind. I pretty much haven't bought full price at all this year for pretty much anything. It's just not the vibes anymore. It's not the vibes. But with that said, I'm gonna go ahead and deliberate on where these palettes go in ranking, and as always, once I get back from the ranking and I'm actually giving it to you, I will explain why each palette ended up in whatever ranking it did, and yeah, we'll get into it. So this was one of the quickest ranking videos that I've ever done, the ranking off camera. If I'm being honest, I literally sat here. I didn't even have to like turn my camera off. I just dipped into it. So let's dive in. Coming in at number 5 is unfortunately the Juvia's Place Rustic palette. For me, it's not about the quality at all. It's about the lack of variety in eye looks. Granted, there's 6 shadows, so how much variety am I really expecting? But for me, I can't really see it. Yes, I could use this bronze and this dark brown, but this dark brown is not as dark as it appears. Let me actually swatch it so you guys can see. Can you see it on my skin? It's like a warm, it's more warm than dark, first of all, and it's just not dark enough. So I find that that's more of a transition color on my skin tone, which means I have to reach out of this palette for something else. Not an end all be all, but it's an annoyance. I want to reach into one palette and get my whole look. I can't really get a whole lot of use out of this because of that. And then these 2 shades, to me, this one is Piss Poor, and this is the main shade that I reach for. So it's really just a combination of these 4 shades, and then for that, give me 2 other shades that I can use for this palette. So unfortunately, that's why that palette had to go in at number 4. Coming in at number 3 is the Glamlight Friday the 13th palette, and there's really, I just wasn't a huge fan. I thought I was gonna love this palette, and then I received it and I looked at it, I was like, And I was like, oh no, we're gonna make it work. We're gonna enjoy it. I'm sure I'm gonna like it. And me and this palette never really clicked as much as I thought it. And I really deliberated over whether I was gonna pick this up. If you saw that video where I picked up this and some other things, I don't know. It just didn't click for me. It really didn't. These shimmers to me just appear a lot darker on the eye. And then you have these really, really dark mattes. Not a bad thing. There was not a lot of range in this palette. I wish that you had at least 2 light mattes up here just to give me some range. I find that that is definitely a preferred quality in my eyeshadow palettes for me. I love the depth, don't get me wrong, but there's just a tinge bit too much depth. And say what you will about Friday the 13th, unfortunately I've seen that movie. There are lighter tones throughout that movie that could have been applied in this palette and made sense. So we have top 3. We're gonna take a second, go ahead and pause this video and comment down below the top 3 in the order that you think they will appear. We have the Bute Ambient palette, the Shroud Cosmetics Moonfall palette, and of course the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. So in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Let's dive in. So coming in at number 3, I have the Shroud Cosmetics Moonfall palette. When it came to this palette, it was another issue for me similar to the Friday the 13th. There was just a little bit too much depth and not enough lighter tones. I wish that they had made either the Moon Moss or the Primarial just a little bit lighter, just a tinge, so that I could just blend out a little bit more. But otherwise, it's fantastic palette. I really did like this palette, but the other palettes just had a little bit more. They just had a little bit more. And going into number 2 is the Ace Bute palette. And I think the little bit more that this palette had is, of course, the range in shades. You had some lighter tones and some deeper tones. You had a kind of not so big range in the shimmers, but I think what really gave me, I love mattes. Mattes really are where my heart is. So these mattes had more for me to work with. Obviously, I had more colors to work with. And honestly, I think I was just more impressed with this palette because I just had such a bad experience with the brand's previous formulas that this just holds a high regard, similar to the Scooby-Doo palette with Glamlight. Prior to that palette, I had really bad opinions on the brand's formula. I mean, the ice cream palette was fine, but I just something never clicked with the brand and their color schemes, and something is just clicking with this formula. So I think that's honestly, if we're getting to the root end of today, I think that's the real reason why the Shroud Cosmetics ended up in 3 and this ended up in 2. Any other day, I'm sure I could have interchanged those two. But regardless, coming in at number 1, of course, was the Natasha Denona I Need a Nude palette. This was just the palette for me, and I have been enjoying this palette. If you see my eye looks, if you see the vibes that I have been giving lately, this is just one of those things that it just works. It's just perfect for me. Okay, I looked up and my camera was not recording. I believe I was talking about this palette though, and I was basically saying that the depth of this silhouette shade is just great. I removed the swatches, so I hope you guys saw the swatches, but there was a huge difference between the shade from the Juvia's Place shade that was supposed to be the darkest shade and this one. Along with, these are just the color schemes and the colors that I've just been reaching for. You have a variety of different textures, both in the matte formula, because there's 2 different matte formulas here, and then in the shimmer formulas, and I love texture variety in eyeshadow. I really do. So that's why this one had to go in number 1. It truly earned its spot, and none of those any other day would ever overtake that spot, not a one. So with that said, that's all I've got for you guys today. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. I'm so happy I was able to bring it to you guys. Like I said, stay tuned. I have quite a few items outside of eyeshadow that I'm ready to review, and hopefully that will be coming up later this month, along with some more Asian Pacific Islander month focused content. So I hope to see you guys then. Bye guys.